Finally the child learns to stand and walk. I was saying prior to that the all movement patterns are organized in the central nervous system. Central nervous system is organized according to levels or layers. The brainstem, midbrain, subcortical and cortical areas are three major levels of organization of the central nervous system. We will review in a minute some reflex patterns and early movement patterns that are controlled at brainstem. When the child's in supine and prone and just rolling over, brainstem. When the child moves to a quadrupedal position, child's motor patterns are controlled in the midbrain. When the child gets to standing and then walking, we have subcortical and cortical control of motor movements around the motor strip and other areas. The last two stages of the development of locomotion that I'm going to mention right now are standing and walking, where the child becomes fully bipedal. The child, one component of that stage is cruising, where the child pulls themselves up and supports themselves against something like a chair or a table and rocks back and forth and pivots back and forth, practicing flexion, extension, rotation. You see rotation and counter rotation, by the way, in crawling. You see kids doing interesting things as they move from one position to another. When we adults sit up from supine, if I'm in supine and I'm on my back and I want to sit up, I could do this barely at my age, but I can do it. Straight up. Kids do not sit up straight up. How do kids sit up? From supine. This is what they do. They do an entire rotation. They go into quadrupedal position, then they back into it and sit like this. They go through all of those movements. Only later, after the kids, say, are 2 years old or older, can they ultimately be able to sit up like this. Because a sit-up like this integrates all those other subcomponents. So all those extra movements that a young child has to do to move from one position to another, those, by the way, the rotation and goes into standing as well, the full rotation. All of those extra movements become components or building blocks of higher level movements, integrated movements. And that is really the story of development. Development is always stage-like, and each stage of development in movement or in speech and language or cognition or any of the behavioral systems is stage-like, and lower levels of organization are required for upper levels to develop. I'm always very interested in sensory motor development, since a lot of that nature of sensory motor development really does apply to language and the nature of content development and the nature of syntax development. And it tells us how we need to intervene in cases of language disorder. We'll get into that. So standing and walking are the last stages. The final thing I want to say is that, two final things. One is I want to mention reflex patterns that influence the child that you should be sensitive to. I'm sure you already have background in the oral motor reflex patterns that are in the baby show. Supple swallow, which has to do with pulling liquid into the mouth by creating a vacuum by sticking the tongue out, that is, extending the tongue, and then retracting and sucking backwards. Rooting, which is a movement pattern by what happens is you stroke the child's cheek or something, and the child moves in the direction of the stimulation. So you get suckle, you get rooting, and biting, which is a stimulation of the gums or teeth. You get either a chewing kind of biting or a biting without release, and that occurs more, it's a significant occurrence in kids with neuromotor dysfunction, tonic biting. Some kids with cerebral palsy will bite. If you put pressure on their mouth, they'll bite, and they will not release. And that is very dangerous, and you want to be very careful if you're working with that population. Babies are born with these other reflex patterns. If you put a newborn baby's feet on the ground, you'll see them step. I think that's illustrated on the videos that I put up for you. You see a crawling kind of pattern and a long spinal pattern. And there are two very important reflex patterns that are illustrated on the videos that I put up for you. The asymmetric tonic neck and the symmetric tonic neck reflex. The ATNR, asymmetric tonic neck reflex, in supine. You will see this on video. You will see this stressed. When the baby is in supine and turns their head to the sideways, you get extension on the face side and flexion on the skull side. A tendency towards it, and then when their heads go this way, you get it the other way. You don't get it as extremely as I'm showing you, although I have one with Jordan that I'm going to try to post that shows it. It's pretty close to this. This comes in at 1 month and goes out by 4 months. It goes away. It's asymmetric, meaning the two sides of the body are doing separate things. The other is symmetric tonic neck reflex, symmetric, and that is in prone. There's extension through the neck, head and neck, shoulders and spine, and arms, so that you get prone prop, and the legs are flexed. And that is the symmetric tonic neck reflex. That comes in closer to 4 to 6 months and supports a symmetric child, which occurs at about 6 months. Of course, babies are not born with necks. If you look at a newborn and watch that tape again, they have to, in a sense, construct them, and that leads to the vocal cords and vocal mechanism descending, and allows for ultimately articulation. But early on, for example, babies can breathe and drink at the same time. By 1 year, they can't do that. They have to sequence. Part of the neck development, this symmetric tonic neck reflex, which allows for extension of the head and neck, and prone prop supports that development. There are a couple of other reflex patterns that are in you and I, and they're there for our whole life. One is the arm support reactions. So when you're thrown sideways one way or another, your arm goes out automatically to keep you upright and support you. And the equilibrium reactions, which are the little movement patterns that are built into your body that develop over the first few years of life. And they keep you, when you stand again, stability in a speech posture is important. You have a built-in reflex pattern called equilibrium pattern, supported by the vestibular system, that if you go a little this way, you get straightened out this way. You go a little this way, your body straightens out this way. Thousands of these things occur every second, thousands of movements. You're not conscious of them, but they keep you upright. They also get you seasick or car sick, when you're constantly thrown off balance and your body is trying to right itself. You try to read I can't read in a car or a bus, I will get car sick. So these are reflex patterns. Somebody by the name of Fiorentino is a very big name who alerts us to these. These come in and go out, or come in and stay with us and help us in typical development. But in cerebral palsy and atypical motor development, they stay, or they don't develop, the ones that stay with us for life, and therefore trouble. We'll get into that further. I want to say one more thing right now, and that is that I usually point out to the class, when I'm working in front of a class, if you're watching this videotape and writing right now, I'm going to write something on the desk. I am really demonstrating the asymmetric tonic neck reflex pattern. Notice my face is to my pen, and so I got extension on my face side. And this hand here, which is not where I'm facing, it's way more flexed. See that? It's naturally flexed. Naturally. If I was a lefty, you'd see this. I also have another pattern that's very natural.